5D Mystery School.
Welcome back to 5D Mystery School. Is it possible that America could have been the home to Atlantis and Lemuria? Well, to get the answer to that, stay tuned.
5D Mystery School.
Blessings. The name of this lecture is Ancient America, Lemuria, and Atlantis. So I'm going to start it off by making some statements, reading you some supporting articles, showing you some maps and some photos, and leaving you to come up with your own conclusion. So, how far back does the history of the United States extend? Well, what if I told you that this country was once the breeding grounds, the stomping grounds for advanced, highly advanced civilizations? Now, in my lecture, Lost History, I briefly cover the Tartarians, but today we're going to look at the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. Now, I'm going to keep this to about between 6 to 9 parts, and I'll get as probably midway in the rabbit hole so that way this video does not get banned. There are strong, energetic hotspots all over this country, and they are undeniably felt whenever you encounter them. There are 2 places that I would like to cover in this lecture. That's going to be Louisiana and California. Now, I believe that Louisiana could be connected to Atlantis and California to Lemuria. Of course, to really get a primary source, I would have to visit each location, but I'm going to present you with articles that will substantiate these claims as best as possible. Also, inserts from books and maps. Now, before I present my findings, I would like to give a special thanks to Frank Joseph for his teachings and his research, which inspired me to dive a little bit deeper in this topic. Now, as mentioned in another lecture, California was once an island, and it could have been a part of the lost continent of Mu. This little excerpt says, "Fantastic but true, the scientific and mystical discovery of a strange civilization that disappeared 50,000 years ago. Intensely interesting." So keep the 50,000 years ago in mind. Legends of Mount Shasta. California's Mount Shasta has been the subject of an unusually large number of myths and legends. In particular, it is often said that there is a secret city beneath its peaks. In some stories, the city is no longer inhabited, while in others, it is inhabited by a technologically advanced society of human beings or mythical creatures. Native American legend centered on a hidden city called Telos of advanced beings from the lost continent of Lemuria. Side note, in the new show Secret Invasion, one of the main squirrels' names is Talos and his daughter's name is Gaia, like Earth. Hidden in plain sight. Anyway, the book A Dweller on Two Planets, which claimed the survivors from a sunken continent called Lemuria were living in or on Mount Shasta. Ancient America, Part 2, continuing on. Oliver's Lemurians lived in a complex system of tunnels beneath with jeweled walls and fur-carpeted floors with the mountain, and occasionally were seen walking with the surface dressed in white robes. Now let me pause for a very important, lengthy side note. These Lemurians were known to have gold, right? A lot of gold. So this area that they were occupying was not only Mount Shasta, but the entire region of California, right? So you can imagine if this is like, let's just say a currency or just a commodity that they own in large quantities, then they would be all over the area. Or not all over the area, but just maybe in safe deposits somewhere. Now let's fast forward to after the discovery of California. You have the California Gold Rush from 1848 to 1855. This gold rush began January 24, 1848. The news of gold brought approximately 300,000 people to California from the rest of the United States and abroad. The sudden influx of gold into the money supply reinvigorated the American economy. The sudden population increase allowed California to go rapidly to statehood in the Compromise of 1850. The gold rush had severe effects on native Californians and accelerated the Native American population's decline from disease, starvation, and the California genocide. The California genocide was the killing of thousands of indigenous peoples of California by the United States government, agents, and private citizens in the 19th century. It began following the American conquest of California from Mexico and the influx of settlers due to California gold rush, which accelerated the decline of the indigenous peoples of California. These were encouraged, tolerated, and carried out by authorized militias. So they were replaced by people who came from the other side of the United States to the gold rush, right? I'm willing to bet that a large majority of the people who came to the gold rush was from the orphan trains. The orphan train movement was a supervised welfare program that transported children from crowded eastern cities of the United States to foster homes located largely in rural areas of the Midwest. The orphan trains operated between 1854 and 1929, relocating about 200,000 children. And with my research, I've actually found that the number is 500,000. It could be even higher. But that's another rabbit hole. The orphan trains took place 168 years ago, supposedly, and 1,272 years before that was the introduction of the Gregorian calendar. Was it 1,272 years before or 272 years before? From ancient origins, the phantom time hypothesis, the greatest fiction ever written? I always read question marks like that. This conspiracy theory centers on the claim that the Anno Domini calendar system was manipulated such that Otto III reigns began in 1000 AD, which suited the narrative of the start of a new Christian millennium. As a result of this adjustment, medieval chroniclers had to write 297 years of fictional history to hide the time manipulation. It was believed that in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII abandoned the Julian calendar, which had been serviced since 45 BC, in favor of the Gregorian calendar, a system that is currently in use today. As a result of switching calendars, Pope Gregory XIII ordered his scribes to add 10 days to the new calendar so that the Easter would fall on the correct date. This correction was officially set in motion on October 4, 1582, which was then corrected to be October 15, 1582. But remember, before 1582, it said J 582, and J stood for the year of Christ, and then 582, and they added the 1, which then made it 1582. So if they never added the 1, it would have been 582. I don't know why I was saying 272. I meant to say 440. That means that it would have only been 440 years ago that the introduction of the Gregorian calendar took place. Right, so 272 years before the orphan train, this change took place. So the claim is this specific place in the Pacific Ocean in between Asia, North America, South America, and Australia was once the lost continent of Mu. And a great flood came and wiped the continent away, and what you have left are the Pacific Islands. And some researchers believe that Mu was actually the cradle of civilization, not the Garden of Eden. This is where all of the races were created and expanded out from. And on the other side of this continent, North America, was Atlantis. But we'll get to that in a second. So besides Hawaii, Guam, Fiji, Tonga, you also have Australia and the Australian Aborigines. They could have very well have been interacting and thriving with the Lemurians and the Atlanteans. Their origin story, along with Hawaiian origin story, is pretty interesting. Japan can also be included in that, but I'll show you that in a second. Now, just to cover a little bit more of the geography. Now, if you were to have the inhabitants of Mu come to North America, that means that they would have first stopped at California, and if they would have went a little further out, they would have went to like Phoenix in Mexico. In Phoenix, you have the Phoenicians. In Mexico, you have the Mayans. Now, I want you to think about the indigenous peoples of Japan and how Japan belongs to this family. Now let's talk about Japan's ancient underwater pyramid. Let's dive deep. A local diver first noticed the Yonaguni formations in 1986, after which a promontory on the island was unofficially renamed Isiki Hanto, or Ruins Point. The district of Yonaguni officially owns the formations, and tourists and researchers can freely dive at the site. Some experts believe that the structures could be all that's left of Mu, a fabled Pacific civilization rumored to have vanished beneath the waves. On hearing about the find, Kimura said his initial impression was that formations could be natural, but he changed his mind after his first dive. The characters and animal monuments in the water, which I have been able to partially recover in my laboratory, suggest the culture comes from the Asian continent, he said. One example I have described as an underwater sphinx resembles a Chinese or ancient Okinawan man. Whoever created the city, most of it apparently sank in one huge seismic event that this part of the Pacific Rim is famous for, Kimura said. The world's largest recorded tsunami struck Yonaguni-jima in April 1771 with an estimated height of more than 131 feet, 40 meters. He noted, such a fate might also have befallen the ancient civilization. Kimura said he has identified 10 structures off Yonaguni and a further 5 related structures off the main island of Okinawa. In total, the ruins cover an area spanning 984 feet by 492 feet. In numerology, that's 3 by 6. Interesting. And 300 meters by 150 meters is still 3 by 6. Interesting. Anyway, check out the rest of that article. It gets pretty interesting, and it also includes a skeptic's point of view, just for critical thinking. I think it's worth noting that the Mormons do have a belief that a lot of America are ancient holy sites. And if the Phoenicians came from the lost continent of Mu, the Phoenician alphabet became the basis of the Greek alphabet. So they would have occupied Phoenix, Arizona, which is not that far from Sedona, Arizona, and Sedona is known as being an energy vortex, just like Mount Shasta. And not that far away from the Sedona energetic hotspot is the Grand Canyon. Just like they found an underwater sphinx in Japan that had Asian features, they also found Asian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. I also believe it's worth noting that there is a straight path from where Mu used to be to the Arctic Circle in the North Pole, straight to where you can see the Northern Lights, and this is a place that was spoke about in the book of Enoch. And before moving forward, just think about, if you ever been to California, there is a energy that is felt here, and think about how rich the soil is here to have trees like the sequoias, General Sermon, Big Sur, Joshua Tree. Now the Lemurians are known for being giants, which makes sense of this as a source of their oxygen. Ancient America, part 5. Let's get into it. So, as you can see, the Bering Strait, as they call it, was the land that was connecting Alaska and Russia. And in the middle is a connection, a path to the North Pole. Now, in the Alaska, you do have a lot of paranormal instances that happen that is similar to the Bermuda Triangle. You have what is called the Alaskan Triangle. There's a film about it called The Alaskan Triangle, The Dark Pyramid. Everything you need to know about the Alaskan Triangle. Experts and eyewitnesses have spent decades attempting to unlock the mysteries of Alaska Triangle, a remote area infamous for alien abductions, Bigfoot sightings, paranormal phenomena, and vanishing airplanes. And this is from August 25th, 2021. The Alaskan Triangle is between Anchorage and Juneau. It's comprised of vast boreal forests, barren tundra, and icy peaks. In the past 4 decades, people have gone missing from the region at a rate of about 4 from every 1,000 individuals, 2 times the national average. Hundreds of coordinated search and rescue missions take place every year to find missing residents, hikers, tourists, and airplane passengers, often to no avail. And the Dark Pyramid, what they're saying is that there is a dark pyramid that is underneath the Alaskan Triangle, and that is what's causing these disappearances. Now, this is related. On the other side, a bit far-fetched, paranormal explorers claim a huge crystal pyramid on the seabed is the secret behind the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. Explorers find gigantic structures under the sea and suggest that they explain why so many planes crash when flying through infamous triangle. So they're saying that it's a pyramid underneath the Alaskan Triangle and it's a pyramid underneath the Bermuda Triangle, and these are contributing to the disappearances. The Bermuda Triangle is in close proximity to what I believe is Atlantis, and the Alaskan Triangle is in close proximity to what I believe is ancient Lemuria. And since I don't believe in coincidences, I definitely think these are related. Paranormal investigators have claimed a massive crystal pyramid is lurking beneath the ocean in an area commonly known as the Bermuda Triangle. The person who discovered the gigantic structure said it was as large as the Great Pyramid of Giza and totally transparent. And this just shows you the area, and you can see how close it is to the Gulf of Mexico, which is close to Louisiana. and I'll get to Louisiana shortly. Dr. Verlag believes that further investigation into the secrets in the Pyramid Center could reveal more information regarding the cases of mysterious disappearances associated with the Bermuda Triangle. She went on to suggest that the pyramid is made of a smooth, crystal-like substance and were 3 times the size of the pyramids of Cheops. Cheops? Anyway, in a press conference held in the Bahamas, the scientists presented a report with the exact coordinates of the pyramid and made note that the technology at use is unknown to modern science. Interesting. So I want you to notice the location. You have Hawaii, which is approximately 6,200 kilometers from Japan and 4,100 kilometers from the United States. Let's dive deeper. Okay, so now I'm going to read some excerpts from A Dweller on Two Planets along with other sources. Now, you can't really see the print here. I'm going to read them from my MacBook. Please follow along. Chapter 16, Legends, Lemuria. But the modern name of Lemuria was named for the mammal lemur. In the mid-19th century, paleontologists coined the term Lemuria to describe a hypothetical continent bridging the Indian Ocean, which would have explained the migration of lemurs from Madagascar to India. Lemuria was a continent which submerged and was no longer to be seen. By the late 19th century, occult theories had developed, mostly through theosophists, that the people of this lost continent of Lemuria were highly advanced beings. The location of the folklore Lemuria changed over time to include much of the Pacific Ocean. In the 1880s, a Siskiyou County, California resident named Frederick Spencer Oliver wrote A Dweller on Two Planets, or The Dividing of the Way, which described a secret city inside of Mount Shasta, and in passing mentioned Lemuria. Edgar Lucien Larkin, a writer and astronomer, wrote in 1913 an article in which he reviewed the Oliver book. In 1925, a writer by the name of Sylvius wrote Descendants of Lemuria, a description of an ancient cult in America, which was published in the Mystic Triangle, August 1925, and which was entirely about the mystic Lemurian village at Mount Shasta. Sylvius reported that Larkin had seen the Lemurian village through a telescope. In 1931, Wishart Spinley Survey published a widely read book entitled Lemuria, the Lost Continent of the Pacific, in which Sylvius' material appeared in a slightly elaborated fashion. The Lemurian Mount Shasta legend has developed into one of Mount Shasta's most prominent legends. The entries in the section documented the books and articles about Mount Shasta and its Lemurians. Okay, and this source is The Truth Behind the Legends of Mount Shasta by Richard R. Andrews. And this excerpt says, "Revered and let it inspire and enhance thee. Let it remind thee of the 7 secret cities, of which one is Mount Shasta, but not in view of the mortal eyes, because of the conduct and habit of lies. Legends have flourished and perversion grew thick, but the great ones are not troubled with ignorance and tricks." Now it's page 48. And this source is The Smoky God and Other Inner Earth Mysteries by Timothy Green Beckley. And this excerpt says, Shirella states that Telos is primary Lemurian outpost located within Mount Shasta with a small secondary city in Mount Lassen, California. It says Telos means communication with spirit. I just realized that this is a lot to say, so I'm going to try to narrow it down. Okay, so when the city, Telos, was constructed about 14,000 years ago at the termination of the Lemurian continent, when the scientists and priests of Lemuria realized the continent was about to sink, they petitioned a group called the Agartha Network, which controlled at the subterranean cities, to build our own city beneath Mount Shasta. There was an original set of caverns there. We chose to enlarge these caverns to make them bigger and more livable. We have perpetual light through a process of energizing stones to create full spectrum lighting. We process them with forces that make small suns. The tunnels underneath Mount Shasta are vast and house equipment and ships you wouldn't believe could possibly exist. There are teleportation and levitation devices, huge by our definition, motherships, and a crystal almost the size of New York City's skyscraper. This source is Lemuria, the Lost Continent of the Pacific by Wishart Spinley Survey. Survey's tale contains a description of the Mount Shasta Lemurians. One of these oddly dressed individuals would come to one of the smaller towns and trade nuggets and gold dust for some modern commodities. These odd-looking persons were tall, graceful, and agile, with larger heads, much larger foreheads and headdresses that had a special decoration that came down over the center of the forehead to bridge the nose, and thus hid or covered a part of the forehead that many have attempted to see and study. The book states that the ruins of the Lemurians are found all over Northern California and Southern Oregon. In particular, there was a well-built Lemurian preserve on top of a mountain north of Olean and Klamath County. Contains a rather speculative account of Klamath Lake Indian petroglyphs resembling the characters of the supposed Lemurians alphabet, the Greek alphabet, and the ancient Druid Brotherhood. Pause, side note, the Druid Brotherhood is where they get the term Hollywood, right? Because the holly trees were what the Druids used for magic. And of course, the Hollywood sign sits on top of the Hollywood Hills, and who knows what secrets lie behind the Hollywood Hills, but that's another lecture. This source is Cosmic Forces, as they were taught in Mu relating to the Earth by James Churchward. This is the only book by Colonel James Churchward which directly mentions Mount Shasta. Churchward developed an elaborate theory of geology based on the idea of very long gas chambers or tunnels running through the Earth. He calls his tunnels gas belts, and these belts roughly line up the world's volcanoes. He includes a map of Cascade Belt, which consists of 3 or more tunnels which intertwine like loose ropes underground along the Sierra Nevada and Cascade ranges. He says, during the last few years, there have been several quakes in Mexico on this belt, some doing damage to life and property. An extremely bad belt block in Mexico would send Mount Shasta and Mount Lassen into activity again. We're about halfway through these sources. I have a lot. Still the same book. The land of Mu was a large continent situated in the Pacific Ocean between America and Asia, its center lying somewhat south of the equator, basing its area on the remains which are still above water. It would have been about 6,000 miles from north to south. All the rocky islands, individually and in groups, scattered over the Pacific Ocean, were once part of the continent of Mu. About 12,000 years ago, cataclysmic earthquakes sent Mu asunder. She became a fiery vortex, and the waters of the Pacific rushed in, making a watery grave for a vast civilization and 60 millions of people. Easter Island, Tahiti, Samoas, Cook, Tongas, Marshall, Gilbert, Caroline, Marianas, Hawaii, and the Marquesas are the pathetic fingers of the great island, standing today as the sentinels to a silent grave. This source is called Lemurians on Mount Shasta by Clem Davies. And this quick excerpt says, the author concludes that the Aquarian age, in which the human race regains the lost powers held by the Lemurians, is one and the same as the millennium. He writes, God gives us glimpses, such, for instance, as this one, the existence of Lemurians, on Mount Shasta, of a great and better world in the millennium to come. This source is called The Mysteries on Mount Shasta by M. Dorio. This one is lengthy, but stay with me. I'm going to give you an account of what happened to me in 1931. I'm not going to ask you to believe it, but it is not a fairy story. When I was lecturing in Los Angeles in 1931, 2 of the inhabitants of Mount Shasta came to Los Angeles and attended my lectures, and they were there for a week before they let me know who they were. And then, one Friday evening, they introduced themselves to me, and they told me I could visit them at Mount Shasta. I told them it was impossible for me to go there and get back in time for my lecture. They said, we have another way of going, so we took a car out into the hills just off of Cahuenga Boulevard, out through the Hollywood, and drove out toward Topanga Canyon. They gave me a little thin mask, almost like cellophane. We did not have cellophane at the time, at least not much, and it had no chemicals, and they told me to put over my face, and I did. Then they gave me a belt with 2 little pockets on the side and a row of buttons. I did not know what was going to happen, but I knew what was going to happen. But I knew something was going to happen. Each one took me by the arm and told me to press certain buttons. All right, let me read that last part over and I'm going to finish. Each one took me by the arm and told me to press certain buttons, and I went up through the air like a rocket plane, and we rose until the earth looked like it was almost fading out. Breathed perfectly because something in the mask over my face condensed the breath, and it seemed that around us there was a shell of some kind of force, because I can hear a humming noise all the time. When we came down, it seemed like almost no time had passed, probably 15 or 20 minutes. We landed about 2/3 of the side of the Mount Shasta. We landed in front of a small building. Almost describes a city within the mountain. The space we came into was about 2 miles in height and about 20 miles long and 15 miles wide. And it was as light as a bright summer day because suspended almost in the center of the great cavern of space was a giant glowing mass of light. And this source is the Legends of Lemuria, and it says the name Lemuria was proposed as the name for the sunken land bridge or continent separating the two places. This Lemuria allowed the lemurs to migrate. Later, German zoologist Ernst Haeckel proposed that perhaps Lemuria was the central place of human evolution from which the human races spread out like rays. These were all scientific, non-mystical ideas. Eventually, the idea of a mystical Lemuria as a center of the root races entered the occult literature, especially through the Theosophical Society writings of Madame Blavatsky. Thus, there can be said to have been 3 separate Lemurias, that of the ancient Romans, that of the mid-19th century paleontological community, and that of the late 19th century occultists. In 1908, the idea of the occult Lemuria had been applied to California in general, and in 1925 to Mount Shasta in particular. Alright, last excerpt. Some scientists have long ago declared that there are certain of these early people migrated to other parts of the earth before the continents of Atlantis and Lemuria are supposed to have disappeared beneath the waters of the ocean, and the Lemurians on Shasta are doubtless the descendants of those early survivors who trekked to the American continent, possibly South America, the succeeding generations finally moving north to California. And this excerpt goes on to say that they do a ceremony every single night where they give praise to Guatemala for their safe arrival here, and that's what they call Earth. And this is the book, The Lost Continent of Mu by Colonel James Churchward, 1931, if you want to check that out. Now it does say Atlantis was situated in the center of the Atlantic Ocean. It was an immense continent island, and at the time of its submersion, it was the center of Earth's civilization. Keep that in mind, we're going to come back to that in a second. Here's an old news article where they mention the mystery of lost Lemuria. The article is called Echoes of Lemuria, and there's a lot more of old articles that mention Lemuria. Now I'm going to do some noteworthy mentions about Lemuria before I briefly talk about Atlantis and close this lecture out. Here's a news article. Northern lights spotted over Mount Shasta during geomagnetic storm Thursday. This was March 23rd of this year. Mount Shasta woman photographs lights and sky seen throughout California. This was March 21st of this year. UFO-shaped lenticular cloud spotted near Mount Shasta. I'm just laughing because they'll just come up with so many different names for clouds, and they'll teach us these names in school. So whenever we see them, we'll just regurgitate what we learned in school, even though it's just BS. But I digress. Look at this cloud over Mount Shasta. As it turns out, the orb was what's known as a lenticular cloud, a stationary weather phenomenon that develops on the downside of the mountains. Mount Shasta commonly sees lenticular clouds during the winter, right? Several other residents got a shot of the UFO-shaped cloud. There was a man named J.C. Brown who said he was going to go search for Lemuria, and here's the article that proves that. 88 Stocktonians left behind a search for the lost continent, but J.C. Brown was to never be heard from again. Here's a shot of some of those clouds that could be seen over Mount Shasta. Now, when the excerpt from the book mentioned that they developed an underground network, that can be proved with the elaborate underground network that connects every single state in the United States, but we're just going to focus on LA here. The underground catacombs of LA's lizard people. Comes from LA Magazine. Elon Musk didn't invent the idea of drilling holes into Los Angeles. George Warren Schoenfeld did it first. This article comes from Glenn Creason, January 22nd, 2014. Here's an illustration of those tunnels. One of the more colorful urban legends of LA is that the lizard people, an advanced race of humans who created an underground city here some 5,000 years ago. According to this story, incalculable riches and gold tablets with the origins of human civilization carved into them were just waiting to be discovered by some savvy treasure hunter. This super race, allegedly related to the Mayans, had purportedly fled a catastrophic meteor shower and created several such communities along the Pacific coast, including the one in our dear basin. The so-called lizard people were so intellectually and technologically advanced that they used mysterious chemicals to dig a network of some 285 tunnels, fully equipped with vast chambers, large enough to accommodate 1,000 families who lived off of a store of food and water placed there by a tribe. This story, loosely drawn from a Hopi Indian myth by a tribesman called Chief Greenleaf, was told to a geophysicist and mining engineer named George Warren Shufeldt in 1933. Shufeldt swore up and down that he had discovered the exact location of 1,900 square feet of tunnels, rooms with 9,000 feet of floor space, and 16 places where gold was stored, all by using his radio X-ray machine. Go check out the rest of this article for more. It gets pretty deep. And here's an article to substantiate Shufeldt's claim. Underground tunnels of Los Angeles. During Prohibition, corrupt city officials ran drinking dens under the streets of downtown Los Angeles, and you can just take a look at it. And if you're ever in downtown LA, they have like these little glass inserts on the ground sometimes, and they're broken. You can see down. It's like you can see it goes like really deep down there. And there are also a lot of doorways where you can enter underground LA. Aside from service tunnels, there are also abandoned subway and equestrian tunnels from the days before personal vehicles began clogging up LA city streets. There are stories from these tunnels being used by police to transport prisoners, bank securities to move large sums of cash safely, and both coroners and mobsters to store bodies. Mobsters to store bodies? Basically, you can see that there is a very well constructed underground network in Los Angeles, which backs up the claims of the Lemurians and J.C. Brown and Shufeldt. Side note, it's like the tunnels that Elon was going to use were already there. You didn't need to build them. There's a news article to support that claim. Lizard People's Catacomb City Haunted. Engineers sink shaft under Fort Moore Hill to find maze of tunnels and priceless treasures of legendary inhabitants. And that article is from the Los Angeles Times, January 29th, 1934. Here's another news article, Traces of Catacomb City of Lizard People Sought, and it just shows the map of tunnels once again. And the thing about most of these tunnels in California is that a lot of them are protected by the National Park System. But there is a way where you can take back doors and find a way down there if you're brave enough. Let's talk about Pyramid Lake. Pyramid Lake is the geographic sink of the basin of the Truckee River, northeast of Reno, Nevada. Take a good look. So you can see Pyramid Lake used to cover most of Nevada, where the desert is. And at the top, you can see where it says cover most of Nevada. It is approximately 15 miles long and 11 miles wide, covering 112,000 acres, entirely enclosed within the Pyramid Lake Point Tribe Reservation, further proving this claim that California was once an island. Secret tunnels beneath the desert. At the bottom it says, mining cabins from the early days of gold and silver exploration fill the hidden canyons. Ancient rock art from the first people to inhabit the region adores the walls and cliffs. Take this hike to see ancient petroglyphs in Northern California. The site was once an island in a large lake. Now it sits as a 6,000-year-old monument to the history of Northern California. The Lava Bed National Monument, and this dates back to 6,000 years old. And if you want to know more about this, it's called Petroglyph Point. Looks like something out of Westworld, truly. The site is estimated to be between 2,000 to 6,000 years old. Here's some more carvings. Here's some more, and it says, either way, the art of the wall of Petroglyph Point gives us a modern day depiction of the ancient inhabitants of Northern California. Very cool. And you can see the close proximity of Mount Shasta and Petroglyph Point, proving that it was an ancient civilization inhabiting the area close to Mount Shasta. And is also in close proximity to Pyramid Lake. Now, you know migration can happen in California, and these figures were drawn in Blythe, California, which is toward the bottom, but close to where the lake used to be, where California used to separate as an island. These were found. The Blythe intaglios or Blythe geoglyphs are a group of gigantic figures incised on the ground near Blythe, California in the Colorado Desert. And they are near the Colorado River, which is of course close to the Grand Canyon. And you know, if you keep on trekking down California, you'll run into Mexico. Of course, in Mexico, you have the Great Pyramid of Cholula, standing 450 meters wide and 66 meters tall. Of course, in numerology, that's like saying 9 by 3. For an obscure temple no one's heard of, Cholula holds an impressive array of records. It's the largest pyramid on the planet, with a base 4 times larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza and nearly twice the volume. And here's a look at that pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Cholula. Of course, you have the Pyramid of the Sun. It's the largest pyramid in the Teotihuacan and one of the largest in Mesoamerica. And here's a look at the Pyramid of the Sun. Let's not forget, there are pyramids in the Grand Canyon as well. This massive stone tower in the middle of the Pacific once hid a decades-long secret. I'm almost done with the sources, y'all. Roughly 350 miles off the coast of Australia, there sits a massive natural pyramid, one of the last dry remnants of a sunken continent. Ball's Pyramid is the world's tallest sea stack, rising to a staggering height of 1,844 feet above the Pacific, and is home to what is arguably the rarest insect in the world. With it being off the coast of Australia, it could definitely be related to our lost inhabitants. From USA Today, Japan's island number could more than double after a recount found 7,000 unknown islands, and this is from March 3rd of this year, 2023. A total of 7,000 more islands Japan didn't know existed were found through digital mapping by the Geospatial Information Authority of Japan. The agency used advanced technology cross-referenced with past aerial photos to conduct the recount. Now, let's talk about these underground crystal caves. You have a crystal cave in Bermuda, and you have this one. Crystal Cave is a marble karst cave within the Sequoia National Park in the western Sierra Nevada of California. Then you have a crystal cave near Kutztown in Berks County, Pennsylvania. Mexico's Cave of the Crystals was discovered in 2000. Stable temperatures, mineral-rich water, and being almost 1,000 feet underground have allowed these crystals to grow as large as 39 feet and weigh as much as 55 tons. Now, of course, this crystal cave in Mexico is within the state's reach of Arizona and Louisiana. Looks like the crystal cave that Kal-El goes to, when Superman needs his recharge. Cave of the Crystals, or Giant Crystal Cave, is a cave connected to the Nika mine at a depth of 300 meters in Nika, Chihuahua, Mexico. That crystal cave is not too far away from St. Bernard, Louisiana. Amateur archaeologists may have found an ancient city off the coast of St. Bernard. He is also claimed to find a pyramid with the city. And not too far away from St. Bernard, Louisiana, is Poverty Point, Louisiana. And here you can see the distance of Poverty Point from Baton Rouge, Lafayette, New Orleans, etc. Approximately 1.8 miles south of the Poverty Point site center is the Lord Jackson Mound. And take a look at the concentric rings of Poverty Point. And the mounds here in America predate the pyramids over in Egypt. Poverty Point State Historic Site Poverty Point National Monument is a prehistoric earthwork constructed by the Poverty Point culture located in present-day northeastern Louisiana. The culture extended 100 miles across the Mississippi Delta and south to the Gulf Coast. Okay, so remember, researchers believe that it is a pyramid underneath the Bermuda Triangle and a pyramid underneath the Alaskan Triangle. But this pyramid close to the Bermuda Triangle is in close proximity to this pyramid that was found off the coast of Louisiana. And Atlantis was believed to have these rings on the outside of the city, with the center being in the middle of the center ring, similar to the construction found at Poverty Point. Now, Poverty Point is right next, actually sitting right on top of the Mississippi River. Now, remember the shape of these pyramids found in Mexico, right? It's different from what you find over in Egypt. Over in Egypt, you have the perfect pyramid with the triangle at the top. Over here, it's more, the base is wide, and the bottom of it looks more like a mound. Well, here in America, you have mounds that predate the pyramids in Egypt, right? And the mounds take on the same type of structure with the large base, and it goes up this way like a ancient mound. Now, of course, here is a map of the Mississippians, and they were thriving off the Mississippi River right off the Gulf of Mexico. And there were mounds all in this area. And if you continue to travel up straight, you have the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois. You even have the Fairmount Mounds in Philadelphia, which nobody ever talks about. And you have more mounds all throughout the United States. And of course, you have other players that were found in the game. Some researchers believe that this is the oldest civilization on Earth. I don't believe that, but I do believe that they came after the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. Some researchers even believe that the Mayans and the Olmecs are the same people. But when Atlantis and Lemuria was hit with the floods, like most of these ancient civilizations get taken out by floods, right, or mud flood, they had to scatter and find land to survive. And the closest lands that would have been around to survive would be Louisiana for Atlantis, which, if you do your research, you can see why Napoleon purchased the Louisiana Purchase and Egypt at the same time. What did they know? And of course, on the other side where Lemuria was, they would have scattered over here to California, which will explain all the petroglyphs, all of the underground caverns and catacombs and mysterious sightings that you see over here in California. Matter of fact, you can even call Mount Shasta the most paranormal place on Earth. Okay, let me end with some notable mentions. Here's an article. Lost ancient city in the middle of the Pacific Ocean revealed in new satellite images. This is from 2017. There are 36 reservoirs that can contain at least 200,000 acre feet. 11 can hold 1 million more. The biggest is Shasta on the Sacramento River at 4.5 million acre feet. Then comes Oroville with its broken spillways on the Feather River at 3.5 million. Another notable mention, Capital Journal. Does California really need more dams? We are running out of places to put them. And of course, you know, dams are for the control of the water. And if California did used to be an island, you would have to find a way to control all of that water that would naturally flow into that body of water that used to be there in between California and Nevada. California has 1,400 dams. Do the research because that's peculiar. Since Sedona, Arizona is in close proximity, I thought that this story was related and pretty interesting. Missing YouTubers viral video shows energy vortexes in Sedona. Look, that video could be CGI, but I just thought that it was interesting that not only do you have that person who's talking about portals, you have a man who was jumping off a mountain. I think it was the 21st of 2012 in December. He thought that a portal was going to open up at the bottom of the mountain. And you have a lot of other people who believe that there are portals in Sedona and there are beings living at Sedona. Same with Mount Shasta. Another noteworthy mention, Mexico City's secret underground world. We can see the cracks in buildings, said Barrera, and we know if we follow those cracks, we might find a pyramid. And this article goes on to say that they use 3D scanners to see what's underground. Another noteworthy mention, Tonga remains cut off after a massive eruption and tsunami. Here's what we know. The eruption of an underwater volcano near Tonga on Saturday was likely the biggest recorded anywhere on the planet in more than 30 years. And I believe that this is noteworthy because, you know, Tonga is in the mix of Pacific Islands, so you had a large explosion there. And I believe it was in the last 2 years, you had a large explosion in the Atlantic Ocean, not too far away from the Bermuda Triangle. And you know what's underneath the Gulf of Mexico.
And then I looked, and there was water lapping against the shoreline. This band was a ring of mussels. And inside the ring of mussels was a lake. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm already underwater. We went out over the water in this lake and tried to descend in it and bounced off. It was so super saline and dense that the submarine couldn't go down in it. We literally bounced off, and as we bounced off, we sent ripples heading back.
Okay, for my last noteworthy source, from kcet.org, Edgar Lucian Larkin, the Wizard of Echo Mountain. Astronomer Edgar Lucian Larkin inside the Low Observatory on Echo Mountain. In 1932, the Los Angeles Times reported that some years earlier, Larkin had trained his telescope on the slopes of Mount Shasta, searching for survivors of another lost continent, Lemuria. Peering through his lens, the Times incredibly claimed Larkin saw a great temple of carved marble and onyx in a mystic village, populated by 1,000 Lemurians. Credulous readers perpetuated the story and do so to this day, assured that Edward Lucian Larkin was a wizard indeed. And that concludes my sources. Okay, so Phoenix is in close proximity, and so the Phoenix lights almost made the noteworthy sources, but I left them out. But you should look into them either way. So in conclusion, I believe that Mount Shasta, as well as the whole state of California up and down, are the remnants of the survivors of the lost continent of Mu and Lemuria. And you can find their history with things like petroglyphs, caves, and gold. And of course, geoglyphs. Now, floods are one way that history is destroyed, but you also have wars, right, and bombings. So who knows the real reason why they actually bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima? Now, there could have been valuable artifacts left over from the inhabitants of the lost continent of Mu that was destroyed in the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But today we have places like the Grand Canyon, have leftover pyramids, and mounds that all serve as traces of these inhabitants that once walked these grounds of the United States. You can see that we still have mysteries today, like the Alaskan Triangle, like the Great Lakes Triangle, like the Bermuda Triangle, that still leave us scratching our head as to how these energetic vortexes actually work today. However, we do know that there is a ley line system here in the States, and this ley line system happens to line up with a lot of these ancient energetic vortexes. As you can see off the coast of Florida here, one major ley line is in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. Another is the Great Lakes Triangle, and another is Blythe, where those geoglyphs were found. Another is the Alaskan Triangle, so forth and so on. 33 is a strong ley line, and 42 is a strong ley line as well. However, we do know that in close proximity you have Sedona, you have the Grand Canyon, you have the petroglyphs, right? You have the sequoias, you have Yosemite, you have Yellowstone. You have all of these important monuments over here on the West Coast, close to where Lemuria once was. That's no coincidence. And the claim that the Lemurians are giants is definitely believable with the trees and the oxygen that they are working with. So if you want to know the truth, ask Source to give you the truth in the form of intuition and follow the clues. On every continent you can find this drawing, this figure of the God self. It's a man holding two animals. So even though these legends and these artifacts are part of our history, if you use your intuition and third eye, you can see the signs and symbols placed all around you today. Thanks for watching. I love you. Peace.
5D Mystery School.